Order, order. Can I call Miriam Coates to move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that this House has considered the impacts of smartphones and social media on children. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this country, we often take the physical safety of our children for granted. But imagine if our streets were so lawless that it was unsafe for children to leave their homes. Imagine if on their daily walk to school, our children had to witness the beheading of strangers or the violent rape of women and girls. Imagine if, when hanging out in the local park, it was normal for hundreds of people to accost your child and encourage them to take their own lives. Imagine if it was a daily occurrence for our children to be propositioned for sex or blackmailed into stripping for strangers. Imagine if every mistake your child made was advertised on public billboards so that everyone could laugh and mock until the shame made life not worth living. But, Mr. Chairman, this is not a horror movie. This is not some imaginary Wild West. This is the digital world that our children occupy, often for hours a day. Mr. Chairman, our kids are not okay. Since 2012, suicide rates for teenage boys in the UK have doubled. They have trebled for girls. Incidences of self-harm for 10 to 12-year-old girls have increased by 364%. Anxiety rates for the under-25s have trebled. Feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, loneliness and despair are growing amongst our youngest citizens. In just 15 years, childhood has been turned on its head. And, Mr. Chairman, these trends are not unique to the UK. They are happening across the Western world, particularly in the Anglophone and Nordic countries. In the first decade of this century, life was generally improving for children across the developed world. Educational attainment was rising. Depression and anxiety were stable or falling. But something happened in 2010 to change the direction of travel. And then from 2014, the decline accelerated rapidly. Now, whether we look at the data for suicide, self-harm, gender confusion, anxiety, or education scores across the Western world, all these trends showed an inflection point in 2010 and a sharp rise from 2014. So what happened in 2010 and 2014 to so seriously undermine children's welfare? Well, as the US psychologist Professor Jonathan Haidt has charted in his recent book, The Anxious Generation, there is now overwhelming evidence that all these tragic trends have been caused by the rise of smartphones and social media. The front-facing camera iPhone was introduced in 2010. And by around 2014, smartphones and social media had become ubiquitous for children. These products were never tested on children or certified as safe for children. Yet 97% of British teens now owns a smartphone. Half of 9-year-olds use social media. In the US, the average 11 to 14-year-old spends 9 hours a day online. Now, smartphones and social media affect boys and girls differently. Some platforms, such as Instagram, TikTok and Snapchat, have particularly negative effects for girls. These apps exploit natural female tendencies for visual social comparison. But instead of just comparing themselves with classmates, girls are now judged by millions of others against often fake images of what the female body should look like. Where boys are more prone to physical aggression, girls are more likely to employ relational aggression. It's bad enough to be on the receiving end of bullying in the school playground. But when friends and strangers can send hate-filled messages at any hour of the day or night, it's unsurprising that the well-being of girls particularly has collapsed as a result of social media. So as well as girls being more susceptible to the visual social comparison, they're also more susceptible to sociogenic transmission, or what we might call social contagion, which explains the acute impact of trans ideology on girls, and we've seen a 5,000% rise in the referrals of girls to gender clinics. Girls are also, of course, more subject to sexual predation and harassment, with younger and younger girls being coaxed or threatened into sending intimate images and even filming their own sexual abuse. In 2022, the Internet Watch Foundation found 141,000 child sexual abuse images of 11 to 13-year-olds, the vast majority of which were self-generated. The front-facing smartphone camera provides the world with an open door to our little girls in their bedrooms. Now, boys are less affected by visual and social comparison, but where social media is destroying the self-confidence of teenage girls, gaming and porn is rewiring the brains of adolescent boys. Having 24-hour access to pornography superficially satisfies the sexual desires of young men, but it leaves them isolated, lacking in relationship skills, and tragically searching for more and more extreme material to become aroused. The average age of encountering online pornography, much of which is violent, degrading and deeply disturbing, is just 13 years old, just when boys are forming their expectations about sex. Nearly half of young people now believe that girls expect sex to involve violence. Multiplayer video games hack into boys' competitiveness and physical aggression. Again, these games superficially fulfill natural male desires, but they leave boys lonely, withdrawn from the real world, lacking in real skills, and unable to find enjoyment or stimulation away from the screen. For boys and girls, time spent on social media represents an enormous opportunity cost. Hours of doom scrolling are hours not spent gaining physical and relational experiences that will equip them with the resilience they need for real life. We have substituted a phone-based childhood for a play-based childhood with tragic consequences. Even our schools don't provide a safe haven. Recent research by Policy Exchange found that only 11% of secondary schools have an effective phone ban, with the overwhelming majority of children still able to access their devices at school. Interestingly, those schools that had implemented an effective ban were significantly more likely to be rated outstanding by Ofsted and achieved on average 1 or 2 grades higher at GCSE, despite being more typically in deprived areas. 43% of older teenagers say social media has distracted them from schoolwork enough to impact their grades. One child told a Parent Kind survey, "I can't focus on my school homework because every 5 minutes I get distracted and go back onto my phone. Occasionally, I'll see triggering content on social media, such as suicide or gory images." Social media offers constant, instant gratification, with a dopamine hit and a new distraction every few seconds. Is it any wonder that children are less and less able to concentrate, to focus on intellectually demanding tasks like academic learning? For the first time ever, IQ is falling across the Western world. And the international PISA data shows that maths, reading and science scores have all declined since 2014. Now, some question the causal relationship between social media and smartphones and the decline in adolescent well-being. Many blame the financial crash in 2008. But why would these trends only affect the under-25s? Some blame the UK Conservative government. But how can localised economic, political or social conditions account for the collapse in childhood well-being across the Western world all at the same time? I certainly will.
Congratulate her for securing this very important and timely debate and for the excellent speech that she is making. She talks about children and young people in terms of the scorching number of hours that they are online and the very high percentage of children who are engaging in this virtual world rather than the physical world. But there is one group of children who are rather shielded and protected from the influences that she describes. That's the children of tech moguls and those who work in the industry. Does she think that this is very telling and, in equal measure, absolutely damning?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is hugely significant that those who really know how these apps and algorithms work firmly believe they're not safe for children. And Steve Jobs famously remarked when asked if the iPad was addicted that he assumed so because he had designed it to be so. Coming back to the causal links between social media and smartphones and the decline in childhood well-being, Jonathan Haidt and Jean Twenge both present compelling causative evidence of the harms of social media. And in his Substack, Haidt describes 6 experiments that found that when social life moves rapidly online, mental health declines, especially for girls. Not one study failed to find a harmful effect. It is now impossible to deny the devastating impact that smartphones and social media are having on our children. Now, some say this is a parenting problem, that parents need to pay more attention to their children's phone use. But in a survey of older teenagers, half said they'd found ways to bypass parental controls. But it's not just screen time that is so difficult for parents or children to manage. It is all but impossible to control the content to which children are exposed. And as whistleblowers like Arturo Bejar and Frances Haugen have testified, social media companies knowingly use algorithms to feed children harmful and addictive content. I certainly will.
Well, I thank you for securing the debate and bringing us together to discuss this important topic. But back to the problems that parents have. I mean, there is an element. If your child is the only kid in the class who doesn't have a smartphone, then the parent themselves are going to suffer from the peer pressure that we are perhaps trying to protect the children from. Does she see a way around that?
Miriam Coates.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This is a collective action problem. The costs of being the only child or the only parent without that phone are too high, far too high for ordinary parents to resist. And I'll come on to what I see as some of the solutions later on, but he's absolutely right to highlight that issue. So even if the material being viewed is benign, smartphones and social media themselves are highly addicted, and they provide a constant off-ramp to our mental focus and erode our concentration. And I wonder how many honourable members in the last 11 minutes have thought about their phone or looked at their phone, and I certainly have. And as I said, in 2011, when Steve Jobs was asked if the iPad might be addictive, he remarked that he had designed it to be so. And we know as adults how difficult it is to control our own phone use. But the average child gets 237 notifications a day. That's a concentration-busting, addiction-fueling dopamine hit every 4 seconds of waking time. If there were no laws against the sale of tobacco, drugs or alcohol to children, we would not expect parents to be able to defend their children from the might of Big Pharma or Big Tobacco. Yet somehow we do expect ordinary parents to be able to protect their children from the vested interest of the likes of Meta, TikTok, X and Apple, the wealthiest and most powerful companies the world has ever seen. In fact, they are more powerful than most countries, and I think Apple has $3 trillion in the bank, which is as much as our GDP. So they are more powerful than many countries. Now, parents could, as my honourable friend remarked, refuse to give their child a smartphone altogether. But the fact that 97% of teens and half of all 9-year-olds do have one gives some indication of the extreme pressure and the social isolation experienced by the only child or in the school or class without a phone, and we surely cannot believe that 97% of parents are bad parents. I certainly will.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I thank you for this excellent speech that she's given. Does she agree with me that there's 3 things I believe that we could do? Is that we could ban smartphones in schools, we should ban social media up to the age of 16 years old, but also as adults we should take on personal responsibility, which is what I believe Conservative MPs do better than anybody else, and that's that when we are with our children we should keep off the phones ourselves, or at least spend an hour a day where we are not on our phones, and so we can set an example to the next generation coming through.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he's completely right, of course, and we all, I think, studying this topic has made me think much more carefully about my own phone use, and seeing some of the apps that try and disrupt my concentration as actually big companies trying to take my time is quite a helpful way of seeing it. But I think also, as with alcohol, drugs, all sorts of other things, we do need to recognise that there is a difference between adults and children. Adults should have free choice about how they use their time, and this is about protecting children. But whatever the solutions, this cannot go on, and the problems associated with heavy screen use are presenting younger and younger. A fifth of 3- and 4-year-olds now have their own smartphones. And a study last year published in the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics edition found that more screen time for children aged 1 is associated with developmental delays in communication at ages 2 and 4. So there's little wonder that more and more children are starting primary school unable to communicate, with behavioural and emotional difficulties, and this year a quarter of school starters were still in nappies. The economic cost of this assault on childhood will be devastating. We have record numbers of young people signed off work with anxiety. Waiting time for child mental health services are measured in years. Our economy and our welfare state simply cannot afford to support mass worklessness amongst the young. There are huge geopolitical risks too. We spend billions of pounds a year on defence, and yet through the Chinese-owned TikTok, we allow our political enemies direct access to our children in their bedrooms. In China, under 14s are limited to 40 minutes a day on TikTok, and endless doom scrolling is interrupted by 5-second delays. Chinese children are only shown specially selected inspiring content, promoting science, educational and historical content. But in the US and the UK, TikTok feeds our teens with stupid dance videos, hypersexualized content and political propaganda. TikTok is now the most favourable single source of news for British teens. Our emerging generation is being educated through indoctrination from foreign-owned social media, an education that is often anti-democratic, anti-Western and anti-truth. Our enemies are rubbing their hands in glee. Now, in Britain, many people are looking to the Online Safety Act to address these enormous issues, and the Act, when it is fully implemented, will bring some improvements. It should make it more difficult for children under 13 to gain access to social media. It should make it less likely that children encounter the most harmful content. But even if Ofcom can hold tech companies to account in making these protections highly effective, children will still have free access to social media platforms from the age of 13. The Online Safety Act, though welcome, will not rescue our children. But, Mr Chairman, the tide is turning. There is hope that the world is waking up to the enormous damage that smartphones and social media are doing to childhood. Governments across the world are taking action. In the US, Florida has banned social media for under 14s. New York has proposed legislation banning addictive algorithms for children. Congress is taking action against TikTok. New French government guidance says that social media should not be accessible to under 18s. President Macron has spoken eloquently about the need for an age of digital adulthood. And in a speech just yesterday, our own Prime Minister raised concerns about children being exposed to bullying, sexualised content and even self-harm online. Here in the UK, the parents of Molly Russell, Brianna Jai and Mia Janin, who tragically lost their lives to social media, have bravely spoken about the need to act. Campaign groups, Smartphone Free Childhood, Delay Smartphones and Safe Screens are organising despairing parents en masse, calling for collective as well as government action to preserve childhood. All of them are calling for children under 16 to be freed from the phone-based childhood. And the polling on this issue is decisive. Last week, the Sunday Times published polling by More in Common that showed that 7 in 10 Brits think social media is having a negative impact on children. 7 in 10 support banning social media companies from allowing accounts for anyone under 18. Polling from Parent Kind produced similar results. It found 77% of primary school parents back a ban on smartphone for under 16s. And 74% of older teenagers themselves believe that social media is harmful. Now, some in Westminster think that using regulation and legislation to protect children from smartphones and social media is an overreaction or even an unconservative thing to do. And yet, in the country as a whole, Conservative voters are the most likely to support strong action, with 72% of Tory voters in favour of a ban on the sale of smartphones to children, compared to 61% of Labour voters. Perhaps the only Conservatives who don't support these measures are those in SW1. Now, the evidence is unequivocal. Smartphones and social media are making our children sadder, sicker and more stupid. It's just not good enough to shrug our shoulders and fall back on tired clichés like the horse has bolted or the genie's out the bottle. The demand for action from the government is clear and growing. So, Mr Chairman, what can be done? Well, firstly, we must insist that tech companies use age verification tools that are highly effective, so that no underage children have access to social media or pornography. Secondly, we must raise the legal age to use social media accounts to 16. This could be done with an Online Safety Act amendment bill. Thirdly, the government should urgently fund phone pouches or phone lockers for all secondary schools so that all of our children can be free to make the most of their education. Fourth, we must tackle the scourge of internet pornography. If Twitter, which is the most common platform for children to encounter porn, and others, can't keep porn off their sites, they must be forced to ban under 18s from their platforms. And we must update the law so that all sorts of content that is completely illegal in offline pornography, non-consensual sex, violent, degrading, dangerous acts, the appearance of minors, are illegal online too. There is no excuse for this lack of parity between online and offline porn, and indeed 56% of the British public would like to ban online porn entirely. Fifth, we need a public health campaign to explain to parents of small children that smartphones and internet devices are not safe for babies and toddlers, that screen use can cause irreversible damage and developmental delays. Six, just as we have incentivised the research and development of new technologies in other fields, such as energy and agriculture, we should incentivise the development of a new phone that is suitable for children, one that allows one-to-one messaging, phone calls, satellite maps and utility apps such as online banking, but where there is no internet browser or ability to install apps. And seventh, we should ban TikTok from operating in the UK. I am not for one moment saying that we shouldn't teach children how to use the internet safely on a computer, or that there aren't huge advantages in smartphone technology. I, for one, would be lost without Google Maps, literally. But the internet should be a tool to enhance our lives, not a means through which children can be addicted and exploited. We shouldn't make the mistake of believing that all new technologies represent progress. Without a shadow of a doubt, the tech companies will fight all of these reforms. Just like the tobacco industry before them, big tech's business model relies on getting children hooked on their products to provide a lifelong revenue stream. But it's not only the tech industry who will oppose banning social media for children. there are many well-meaning people and organisations and children's charities who will argue that social media has benefits for children, particularly vulnerable children, such as those who are neurodiverse or have mental health problems, are LGBT or gender questioning. But this is a desperately naive position, because the more vulnerable the child, the more at risk they are online. And if you don't believe me, try creating a TikTok account or a Discord account or a Reddit account in the name of a teenager with one of those issues, and you will find your feed filled with porn, predators, pro-anorexia content, all content to draw the most vulnerable children into a world where they are utterly defenceless. So many testimonies of children speak of a stolen childhood. And as one girl told Parentkind, "The other day I was on Instagram. Some random guy started saying I looked like a fat pig and no one likes me. When I tried to get past that, I saw a short where a girl looked really skinny and spoke about body goals. I felt so useless and ugly that I cried myself to sleep." Defending children from this Wild West, I certainly will.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend. It's quite well known the mental health impacts, but does my honourable friend agree that we need to see academia, the NHS, health professionals, to actually look more on the physical implications on the body? We know it also creates sleep disturbances, etc., but the physical implications as well.
I thank my right honourable friend for her intervention, and she's certainly right. Much more research is needed in the wider impacts. And I think there was a study published just yesterday about the correlation between using your phone whilst eating and obesity, for example. So I think there are a whole range of different issues that we could explore. And I would highly recommend Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, for a thorough exploration of all the global trends in this area. So defending children from this Wild West is not the action of a nanny state. It is the moral imperative for governments across the world. Now, Mr. Chairman, in the past, Britain has had a strong record when it comes to child protection legislation. There have been a number of moments in our history where a new danger to children has emerged, public outcry has ensued, and Parliament has been called upon to act. In 1838, the Husker Pit disaster in my constituency led to the passing of the Mines Act, prohibiting the employment of children in mines. In 1885, after public outcry over young girls being sold into prostitution, this House raised the age of sexual consent to 16. Again, following public outcry over the sale of alcohol to children, in 1901, Parliament restricted its sale to under-16s. We are at a similar moment in history. We will look back and ask why we allowed paedophiles, predators, greedy capitalists and foreign enemies unfettered access to our children online. The evidence of harm is irrefutable. The public outcry is growing. Now is the time to act. This government does have less than a year in office, but if we could pass the Coronavirus Act in just one day, surely we can use these next few months to introduce effective legislation to protect children from a real and present danger. Indeed, is there any better reason to be in government than to have the opportunity and the power to rescue the next generation?
Superb. Order. Miriam Coates to briefly
Thank you,
wind
Mr.
up.
Chairman, and can I thank all honourable members who've contributed so compellingly to this debate. I'm hugely encouraged by the strength of feeling and the unanimity in this chamber. But I just want to make a final point. This is not a debate about liberty, it's not a debate about freedom, it's not a debate about parenting, it's not a debate about technology, it's a debate about child development. And the human brain is not wired to learn from passive consumption. It is wired to learn from real-life interaction. That's how children learn. However safe we make the internet from damaging content, children will never, ever gain the skills, the knowledge and the well-being they need from staring at a screen. They will always need real-life interaction. That's why we must restrict screens and ban social media for under-16s, because otherwise they will never learn.